Yes. When a person shows some promising talent for miracles or he does something which is out of ordinary, that person is declared as a saint. And it is done through a process known as canonization, which is a kind of ritual in which Pope declares a particular person as a saint. So this poem, the canonization, plays upon love and sainthood. We will have summing up of the poem, and then we will discuss how Brooks takes this poem as an example of paradox. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. Outside my palsy or my gout, my 5 grey hairs or ruined fortune cloud. With wealth your state, your mind with arts improve. Take you a course, get you a place, observe his honor or his grace, or the king's real or his stamped face, contemplate what you will approve, so you will let me love. The speaker seems to be talking to his critics, and he tells them straightway that you shouldn't criticize my love making, you shouldn't hold your views against my love making. He asks them to stop talking about him. They have so many other things to criticize about him. They can criticize his palsy, his diseases, his old age, premature old age, or how that person has ruined his fortune, means how that person is a spendthrift. And then he gives so many options to his critics. He says you can earn well, you can improve your mind with arts, with study of arts, you can take admission in some course, you can get some jobs and position, you can earn points, earn money, and in this way you can collect coins, or you can take a position in the court of king and thus observe him. He says so there are so many options before you. You can do whatever you like except criticizing me. So he says you can do what you will. It is approved. Only let me love. Don't criticize me because of my love. Alas, alas, who is injured by my love? What merchant ships are my sighs drowned? Who says my tears have overflowed his ground? When did my coals a forward spring remove? When did the heats which my veins, when did the heat which my vein add one more to the plaguey bill? Soldiers find wars and lawyers find out still it is yes men and girls move, though she and I to love. He says, and talking about in terms of conceits, he says that his love hasn't injured anybody. He says, my love making, my cold sighs have not drowned any merchant ships. My tears have not brought flood to a ground. My cold sighs have not brought winter season forward and removed spring. The heat in my veins has not made people sick. And then he says that people will continue to find their own problems. Soldiers will continue to find wars, and lawyers will continue to find powerless people. The world will go on as usual and will not be affected by our lawmaking. Call us what you will, we are made such by love. Call our one, we another fly. We are tapers too, and at our own cost die. And we in us find the eagle and the dove. The phoenix region like more wit by us. Again, some fantastic comparisons are there. He says, whatever we are made so by our love. You can call us flies. You can compare us with candles. And we do not destroy anybody else, but destroy ourselves. We are also like eagle and the dove, the male and female principle. The phoenix region hath more wit. Then he comes to another famous comparison. He says we are more or less like phoenix, because phoenix is a mythical bird, and this bird is supposed to be bisexual. It contains both male and female principles. So he says in one thing, both sexes fit. We are also like phoenix bird because We two have become one. We die and rise the same. There is a famous myth about phoenix that it takes birth from the ashes and then when it grows old, it burns itself and dies, becomes ashes again. And a new bud is born out of those ashes. So he says, we die and rise the same. We are also like phoenix because we also die for each other and then become anew. True mysterious by this love. Whatever we are, the mystery we have is because of our love for each other. We can die by it if not live by love, and if unfit for tombs and years are legend be, it will be fit for words. He says if we are not able to live by love, we can at least die for it. And if our story is unfit for tombs and years, great monuments and tombs in which great people are buried, if we are unfit for being buried in tombs and monuments, our legend be, it will be fit for words. At least we will become immortal in the poetry. So he says, as great people like princes and kings are buried in great tombs and monuments, and these tombs and monuments become a memorial for them, this poem will become a memorial for us. And if no piece of chronicle we prove, we will build in sonnets pretty rooms. If we will not be talked about in history, we will be discussed in sonnets and poems. As well, a well-wrought urn becomes the greatest ashes. Well-wrought means well-made. This poem is compared with a well-made urn. Poem itself is an urn. An urn is a receptacle which contains the ashes. And this poem also memorizes them, also makes a memory of them. So this poem is also like an urn which contains their memories, which contains their ashes. As half-acre tombs, and by these hymns all shall approve us canonized forever. He says, the sonnet, the poem in which our love will be immortalized, will be like a great monument for us. And everybody will say that we became saints of love and thus invoke us. And people will remember us like this. You whom reverend love made one another's hermitage, you to whom love was peace which now is rage, who did the whole world's soul contract and drove into the glasses of your eyes. He says people will remember us like this, that you were saints of love. You are true saints of love. Each one of you was like a hermitage for another one. For you people love was peace, which is now rage, which is now full of anger. He says, again, he says, people will be talking like this, that you contracted each other, each other's soul, and pushed it into one another's eyes. For you, it means for you, the whole world was contracted into the other person's eyes. Means the other person was like a world for you, for both of you. So made such mirrors and such spies that they did all to your bitter minds. He says your eyes reflected one another, and another person was like a world for each of you. So in a way, the world lived within your eyes, and within you, countries, towns, ports, beg from above a patron of love. He says people will call us saints of love, and they will worship us as saints of love and ask a patron of love from us to become real in their own lives. So this is the poem canonization, and in this poem, we have so many complex ideas and so many complex comparisons. The thing is that John Donne is talking about experience of love in terms of experience of sainthood. The world of religion and world of love are connected together, and they somehow are seen as belonging to one another as not separate from each other as is usually supposed to be. So let us come to analysis and how Brooks analyzes this poem. Brooks gives a reading of John Donne's poem, The Canonization, which uses a paradox as its underlying metaphor. Brooks says that there is a paradox at the soul of his poem. Using a charged religious term to describe the speaker's physical love as saintly, John
लिंक डाल दिया मैंने.
effectively argues that in rejecting the material world and withdrawing to a world of each other,
हाँ.
the two lovers are appropriate candidates for canonization. John Donne uses religious terms to describe physical love, right? And calls physical love.
कॉल मेरा पे चल रही है मीटिंग.
Somebody is talking. प्लीज म्यूट योर माइक्स. कौन बोल रहा है? अपना माइक को म्यूट कीजिए आप सभी लोग. पुष्पा, पुष्पा, पुष्पा माइक को म्यूट कीजिए, आपकी आवाज आ रही है. रितु आप भी म्यूट कीजिए माइक को. रितु, हाँ माइक म्यूट कर लीजिए, बाकी ठीक है, बस इन्हीं का म्यूट नहीं. चलिए. So yes, the thing is that the poem equates physical love with spiritual sainthood. And he argues that in rejecting the material world and withdrawing to a world of each other, the two lovers are appropriate candidates for conversion. There is a similarity in the spiritual world, in the religious world, and in the world of love, world of physical love. A religious person leaves society and lives in solitude. In the same way, lovers also reject society because for them, each one of them becomes a complete world. So there is a parallel between the world of love and the world of spirituality. This seems to parody both love and religion. It appears that the poet is making fun of both the themes, but in fact it combines them, pairing unlikely circumstances and demonstrating the resulting complex meaning. But there is no parody. The poet seems to be quite serious, and he is able to see the similarities, the linearity between these two experiences, and demonstrates how these two planes of physical love as well as spiritual experience can come together and can add into the meaning of each other. Brooks points also to secondary paradoxes in the poem, the simultaneous duality and singleness of love, and the double and contradictory meaning of die in metaphysical poetry. Again, Brooks points out that there is a duality in love. You leave the world and still the world becomes your beloved or your lover. And there is a contradictory meaning in the word die. Die is the physical death as well as sexual consummation. So die is also used both as sexual union and literal death. He contends that these several meanings are impossible to convey at the right depth and emotion in any language, but at the paradox. He says since the poet's reason is so complex, he cannot use any simple language to convey what he feels. That's why he has to use complex, paradoxical terms to convey the intensity of his experience. A similar paradox is used in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which is his very famous play, when Juliet says, "For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands to touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." Shakespeare also brings together these two, usually considered dichotomous areas of experiences together when he points out in the speech of Juliet that the experience of pilgrims and the experience of lover are not quite separate. Both of them come together, both of them are seen in similar terms, and their experiences merge and stimulate each other. Brooks' contemporaries in the sciences were in 1940s and 50s recognizing university science curricula in 25 disciplines. When this essay was being written and when new criticism was becoming popular, particularly in 1940s and 50s, science was becoming predominant discipline and human knowledge was divided into different disciplines, different categories. Means physics, chemistry, botany, zoology, you know. So we were creating different disciplines, different partition of knowledge. The study of English, however, remained less defined and became a goal of the new critical movement to justify literature in age of science by separating the work from its author and reader. We can find a similarity between how science was being studied and how literature is being studied under new criticism. New criticism also rejects author. It doesn't consider him as an authority over the text. In the same way as in science, there is no authority, there are only theorems, there are only examples, and there is no authority. So we find there is a similarity there is a level which brings together science and literary studies. Both of them tend to be objective. New criticism talks about objectivity. New criticism talks about, you know, uh, calculated method to pass judgments over literature, what is good and what is bad. See, Vincent and Birdsley's intentional fallacy and affective fallacy. These are two very famous points. Intentional fallacy means the fallacy of interpretation when we consider a poet's intention as of primary value. That is intentional fallacy. क्या होती है इंटेंशनल फैलेसी? इसका मीनिंग ये होता है कि जब हम ये मान के चलते हैं कि ऑथर ने जो जिस इंटेंशन के साथ टेक्स्ट प्रोड्यूस किया है वो फाइनल है, उसका इंटेंशन मैटर करता है, उसके इंटेंशन पर डिपेंड करता है ऑथर क्या कहना चाहता है. Affective fallacy, we have also discussed affective fallacy. Affective is from affectation or from effect. Means the meaning of a work lies in the effect it produces on the readers. कि जो श्रोता है वो कैसे प्रभावित होते हैं, उसमें उस टेक्स्ट का मीनिंग होता है. Now there are different kind of readers and different kind of audiences, and different people have different likes and dislikes. So it becomes very difficult to analyze a work based on the responses of readers because people differ and the tastes differ. And by examining as a self-sufficient artifact, new critics therefore consider a text is self-sufficient artifact. It was a piece of art which was self-sufficient, self-contained. It has got a unity, it has got meaning within its structure and not something outside of it. In Brooks' use of the paradox as a tool for analysis, however, he develops a logical case as a literary technique with strong emotional effect. When he tries to use paradox for analyzing different poems, he develops a logical case for using literary technique. His reading of the canonization in the language of paradox, where paradox becomes central to expressing complicated ideas of sacred and secular love, provides an example of this. So we can agree with this statement that in the poem canonization, which is analyzed by Clint Brooks in this essay, paradox is central to express complicated ideas about sacred and secular love. Paradox is necessary to understand the relation between the sacred experiences and the secular love experience. And so this poem is a fine example of this understanding. So now we are coming to analyzing what are the merits of this essay and what are its demerits. Merits. First we will consider merits. The language of paradox lays out Brooks' argument for the centrality of paradox by demonstrating that paradox is the language appropriate and inevitable to poetry. The central idea of this essay, with which we can have no quarrel, is that paradox is inevitable to poetry. Poetic structure will contain paradoxes. A good poem is not possible without paradoxes as part of its structure. His contention is based on the thesis that referential language, dictionary language, denotative language, is too vague for the specific message a poet expresses. He must make up his language as he goes. The fixed meaning inherent in a language is not sufficiently able to express the complex vision which the poet wants to produce. That's why a poet has to create his own language. Because the kind of vision, the kind of experience, the kind of understanding he wants to give to his poem, it needs words and phrases which are not available to him. So he has to make up his own language to express the complexity of his vision. These arguments corrected a long-held bias in literary studies in which a text was neglected in favor of biographical details of the writer or was simply seen as a product of socio-cultural movements. Before new criticism, biographical criticism, historical criticism were in the vogue, and a text was considered as part of either the biography of the writer or the historical developments outside it. So the emphasis was not laid on the text. People simply did not read text, but rather read more about the poets and the authors, or considered them as testimony of what was happening in the society. It left no room for the imagination and creativity of the writer. So these historical and biographical criticisms, they limited the scope for imagination and creativity of the writer. It foreshadowed the rise of postmodernist theories in which the writer was merely a tool and not a father figure, giving birth to something unique. As we will see further, uh, under modernism and postmodernism, a poet was not considered essential for a text. He was simply a tool. He was simply a function, and 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 he was just there to fulfill a purpose. He was not necessary and essential for the meaning of the text. So we will discuss about these developments later in the next semester when we will talk about death of the author theory, what author has died. We to certain extent we have also discussed about theory of T.S. Eliot when he talks about the mind of the poet is like a receptacle in which different gases got mixed. So the poet is simply a tool, a function, and nothing essential to the structure of a text. Now let us come to certain demerits quickly. R.S. Crane in his essay, The Critical Monism of Plain Brooks, argues strongly against Brooks' centrality of paradox. R.S. Crane, he published an essay, The Critical Monism of Plain Brooks. Monism is made from mono, means single aspect. He criticizes Clint Brooks' uh, certain theories given in this essay. According to him, Brooks believes that the very structure of poetry is paradox and ignores the other subtleties of imagination and power that poets bring to the poets. Clint Brooks says that, R.S. Crane says that Clint Brooks has not been able to give due importance and due emphasis to other faculties like imagination, and how the imagination helps poets to convey their vision. So the exclusive emphasis on paradox is detrimental to the understanding of other faculties, other qualities which are required in making of a poem. Secondly, according to him, Brooks simply believed that imagination reveals itself in the balance or reconciliation of opposites or discordant qualities. We discussed about it earlier also, that for Clint Brooks, imagination is a paradoxical force because it brings together opposite ideas. Brooks, in leaning on the crutch of paradox, only discusses the truth which poetry can reveal and speaks nothing about the pleasure it can give. So when Brooks gives emphasis on the paradoxical aspect of imagination, he neglects that one of the purpose of imagination is, and one of the function of poetry is to give pleasure. And Brooks omits to mention this important function of poetry. Also, by defining poetry as uniquely having a structure of paradox, Brooks ignores the power of paradox in everyday conversation and discourse, including scientific discourse, which Brooks claimed was opposed to poetry. Lynchburg says that paradox is the most important part of poetry. Okay, but he fails to see that paradox is part of everyday conversation. It is also part of scientific discourse, scientific theories. So you cannot claim that paradox is only found in poetry or literature. Paradox is part of our everyday conversation and even scientific theories also. And the last one is Crane believes that using Book's definition of poetry, the most powerful paradoxical poem in modern history is Einstein's formula E is equal to mc square. Those of you who have background in science may know this famous theorem of Einstein. It equates energy is equal to mass multiplied by square of speed of light. Now, this was a very famous theorem at one time, which showed us how mass, time, and distance they are mutually convertible. How the dimensions of mass means weight in a rough term, dimension of distance, or the physical dimensions, length, breadth, and height, they can be converted into energy or time. So time can be converted or can affect mass in distance. So this was a very famous formula of Einstein, and it shows that the weight, the height, and the time, they are different dimensions of the same phenomenon, which contains a profound paradox in that matter and energy are same thing. The argument for the centrality of paradox in irony becomes a reductio ad absurdum. Reductio means reduction. Ad to absurdum means absurdity. So, taken in this sense, where paradox is part of every phenomenon, it becomes something which becomes absurd to talk about and is therefore void or ineffective for literary analysis. So we cannot claim that paradox is something which separates poetry from other sciences or from other phenomena. Because paradox, according to Aristotle, is part of our everyday life. It is even part of science. It is part of nature. It is part of universe. So we cannot claim that paradox makes poetry something different from the scientific discourse. And so it is only an exclusive part of poetry, right? So thank you. We have completed our discussion. Okay, and I hope the major hypotheses are clear now to you. आप लोगों ने फोटोकॉपी मंगा ली है टेक्स्ट की? कौन कौन रह गए थे? जो मैंने फोटोकॉपी रखी है वो आप लोगों ने ले ली है? ज्योति?
नो सर,
नहीं ली है, क्यों? ले लीजिए,
इवनिंग में।
हाँ आज ले लीजिए, उसमें तैयार कर देंगे, ठीक है। और जब आप नोट्स लेंगे तो उसमें देखेंगे मैंने क्वेश्चन बना रखा है, ठीक है। नोट्स और क्वेश्चन के बारे में टेक्स्ट है और नोट्स है। अब आपका काम ये है कि उसको आपने याद करना शुरू करना, राइट, ठीक है। हमारा फर्स्ट ऐसे कंप्लीट हो गया। इसके बाद हम सेकंड ऐसे पर आते हैं, नेचुरल। सेकंड हमारे पास यूनिट सेकंड में we have two texts, the dream walk and the poetic origins and final phases. Okay, in the second unit, part 1, we will start from Sigmund Freud's essay the dream work. Okay, it's a lengthy text, तो सारे टेक्स्ट को तो नहीं पढ़ा पाएंगे हमने, जैसे हमने पहले ऐसे किया है हम इसी तरीके से आपको मेन पॉइंट्स डिस्कस करेंगे उसके। क्लियर है? ओके, और मैंने टेक्स्ट तो नहीं दिया इसके अंदर बिकॉज द बुक फ्रॉम विच दिस पर्टिकुलर चैप्टर इज टेकन इज अ वेरी वॉल्यूमिनस बुक, और मुझे नहीं लगता है कि उसके सारे टेक्स्ट को पढ़ना आप लोगों के लिए पॉसिबल हो पाएगा, लेकिन मैंने उसमें कुछ नोट्स दिए। उस टेक्स्ट के नोट्स से समरी है मेन पॉइंट्स की, आप उसको देखेंगे और हम इसको डिस्कस करेंगे नेक्स्ट। मुझे सजेस्ट कीजिए कि हमने नेक्स्ट जो हमारा पेपर है स्टडी ऑफ लैंग्वेज वो कब से शुरू करना है? कल से कर दें?
जी सर।
कर दें शुरू?
यस सर। एक दिन मतलब आई हैव वन सजेशन। आज इवनिंग तक हम नोट्स ले आएंगे, तो एक बार देख लेते हैं कि उसमें कोई डिफिकल्टी तो नहीं है, उसके बाद नेक्स्ट डे शुरू करें।
तो कर देते हैं, परसों से
उस पर
शुरू करते
डिस्कशन
हैं।
कर लेंगे कल।
हाँ ठीक है, मैंने यूजुअली यही किया है कि जहाँ तक पॉसिबल हो पाया आपके मैंने क्वेश्चंस के नोट्स बना दिए जो आपको याद करने के लिए उसके, और साथ साथ मैंने टेक्स्ट भी डाली है उसके अंदर। ओके, वो हाँ, कल का दिन और ले लीजिए और परसों से कर देते हैं शुरू। और क्योंकि उसमें थोड़ा सा हमारे सामने लिमिटेशंस रहेंगी कि हमारे पास बोर्ड नहीं है अवेलेबल। ओके, तो कुछ प्रैक्टिस में हमें थोड़ी सी प्रॉब्लम आ सकती है, देखते हैं अगर कुछ हो पाता है तो करते हैं। और कुछ शॉर्ट आइटम्स हैं, जैसे पैरोल और लैंग के बीच का एक शॉर्ट आइटम है, तो वो कुछ शॉर्ट आइटम्स में नहीं लिख पाया हूँ। आप लोगों ने वो शॉर्ट आइटम्स खुद लिखने पड़ेंगे, मैंने नोट्स दिए हुए हैं, मैं उनको समझा भी दूंगा, आपको डिस्कस कर लेंगे हम लोग, लेकिन वो शॉर्ट आइटम्स आप लोगों ने खुद बना दे। ठीक है, तो नोट्स को प्रोक्योर कर लीजिए और फिर हम स्टडी ऑफ लैंग्वेज का पेपर भी परसों से शुरू कर देंगे। और टाइम हम रखेंगे, ये 2 बजे खत्म होता है तो हम 2:15 का टाइम रखेंगे, 2:15 से 2:45 बजे, 15 मिनट का ब्रेक बीच में, और उसके बाद हम नेक्स्ट अपनी क्लास शुरू करेंगे। ठीक है,
ओके सर।
ओके, थैंक यू, थैंक यू,
थैंक यू सर।
हैव अ गुड डे।
थैंक यू सर।